Welcome back to the ADI Part 1 podcast for episode 3 with me, Josh Holleran, and Craig Preedy. Today's episode, we're going to be discussing how the ADI Part 1 test links to the ADI Part 2 test. And what we'll do, we'll talk a little bit about the Part 2 test, but more importantly, how getting the knowledge at the Part 1 stage will help prepare you for your Part 2. So I'm going to throw it over to you, Craig, and we'll go first with how can effective study for your Part 1 help you for your Part 2 test?
It is a good question. I think a lot of people that do their part one don't consider the implications that it has for part two. So we mentioned in the last episode about the different categories that are going to be thrown at people when they do their part one test. And two of these categories are very much about linking in with part two. So one of those is about road procedure, and the other one is to do with the traffic signs, signals, car control, pedestrians, and mechanical knowledge. So really the first two sections. So there's half your score for part one comes from your understanding of effectively part two driving skills. Now, it's easy to sort of like flip through some apps and answer some questions and learn that through rote knowledge, but it's not going to help you when you get behind the wheel of your car for your part two test. Now, there are many ADI trainers out there that will support you and help you, but it's great if you can go with a little bit of preparation. So we would advise you strongly to start considering the types of reading that you do. Now, we know reading is not for everybody. And if you can't feel the need to sit down with a book for 20 minutes or half an hour, then there are plenty of YouTube channels that are available that will give you similar sorts of knowledge. But do be careful about the YouTube channels that you watch. Make sure they have some level of credibility behind them, because there's a lot of ADIs out there thinking that they're great drivers and doing a YouTube channel on it. And sadly, they're probably not as great as they think they are. So do be careful what you choose. But our advice would be to look at books like The Highway Code. It's a standard book that everybody who drives a car should have knowledge of. And you need to really understand that knowledge inside out, because during your part two test, you will be assessed on your awareness of signs. You will be assessed on your awareness of road procedure generally. We also would recommend perhaps driving the essential skills, which is a DVSA publication. And pretty much the way the examiner is going to assess you is based on what is contained within driving the essential skills. And finally, the book, which is your additional extra, which I think is a really useful book and can certainly set you a little bit apart from some of the ADIs out there, is the book called Roadcraft, which is the police driver's handbook. And that final book, Roadcraft, is what ROSPA generally assess their drivers on. So those three books should certainly be on your shopping list. And the skills that you will learn and develop as a consequence of understanding this and having that knowledge are going to be absolutely essential for you, not just passing your part two, but for passing those skills then on to people that you're going to be teaching in the future. So if you see something in one of those books that you thought, wow, that's really useful, I can take that to my lesson with my ADI trainer, mention it to them. If you're not sure how to apply it in your driving, then your ADI trainer should know how to apply it in your driving. I hate to say it, but if your ADI trainer doesn't know how to apply it, then I would be questioning whether that's the right trainer for you. Not sure I should say that out loud, but I just did. So we'll keep that in, I think. But yeah, that would be my view. But if you need any advice about which is the right trainer to choose or where to look, then we can help you with that. And you just ask the question on the groups or on the page, or pop a question below, and we're happy to answer that.
I would like to mention that about the trainer that you're using, and absolutely this will stay in because I feel any trainer that has got credibility won't mind this being said. And there are no requirements to be an ADI trainer. So it's one thing being able to teach someone how to drive. It is a completely different job being able to teach someone how to teach someone to drive. and the amount of knowledge that's required to do that. So absolutely make sure you know who your trainer is, what their experience is, and that they're a right fit for you. But there's something quite interesting that you've mentioned there, and I've been aware of it, but it's not stood out quite as much until you've just said it there. And that was when you're going through these books and studying for your ADI Part 1, you might pick up some useful information that you think this is going to help me with my driving, whether that's in preparation for Part 2 or just in general, which highlights, I think, that the studying for the Part 1 shouldn't be studying for the Part 1 test. It should be studying to develop you and your understanding of the road, the vehicle, how they operate, how other people operate on the road, and what rules they should be following. So this studying and what we're talking about is absolutely targeted at the ADI Part 1 test. But I think the knowledge that you're gaining, we should just be learning this to be a complete driving instructor. So we're not studying it to remember the questions for your Part 1 test, but we're studying it so that you can be a better driver and so that you can be the best instructor that you can be, and not just study really hard for your Part 1 and forget it. Study in a way that allows all this information to stay with you, or at least you've then got the capacity to find where that information is. We can't remember it all, but we may need to be able to find it one day. So having that solid foundation is certainly something that's going to help you become a more complete driving instructor.
I agree with that. And actually, just something that you said, you can't remember it all. And there's no shame in that. We're not expected to remember everything. There's a lot of words in these books, and you've got to pick out what you think is going to be the best for you. There are certain parts of these books that you can be directed towards that will really help and support your advanced driving skills that you're going to be required to demonstrate on the Part 2. And let's remember, Part 2 is not actually that much different to what a normal driving test is. You've got to drive at a higher standard, and the number of faults that you commit are less. And the examiner is expecting you to be better than your average driver. But it's not like some of the advanced courses that you might want to take. So perhaps that's an area that you could look into as well. And certainly not necessarily about joining a group if you don't want to, but the knowledge that you gain just by reading up on those courses will help you with your Part 1 as well, because there could be questions thrown at you with regards to advanced driving too.
Absolutely. And our students have got access to YouTube. They've got access to all the social media. And you might find one day that one of your students is asking you a question around this kind of advanced driving. And although that's not what we're teaching as instructors, we don't want people thinking that they're advanced drivers the day they pass their driving test. But we want to maintain our credibility if they're coming to us with legit questions that we should, if we don't know the answer, we should know where to find it, and we should have enough knowledge to be able to give an answer to our students. So it's not just the Part 2 or the Part 3. This is your career as a driving instructor, building those solid foundations. But we'll talk very quickly then on the Part 2. We know that the knowledge that we're learning at Part 1 can help us prepare for the Part 2. But what are the differences between a standard L test and an ADI Part 2 test?
I think it's the number of faults. It's the length of time that you're out. It's the maneuvers that you need to do. And it's your show me, tell me's. And as easy as people might think, if they're a good driver, or they've been a bus driver, or they're coming at this from the LGV industry, or even if you're coming at it from being a Class 1 police driver, ambulance driver, fire engine driver, you may have had all the training in the world, but it's not necessarily going to prepare you for this Part 2 on its own. So it links in this knowledge that you gain, just enhances any skills that you already have. It enhances that knowledge that you have. But more importantly than that, it might well give you new knowledge that you didn't know you needed, which you then need to pass on to the ADI trainer that you've got to get them to show you how to use it effectively. That is the way that I would see it. And these questions will come up in your ADI Part 1 test. There will be questions about understanding what brake clutch overlap means, for example, or what a sustained gear change is. These are things that you're not going to get from just using an app. It's all very well knowing what the answer is, but do you understand what it means in real life? Are you able to go out there and practice it yourself? So, yeah, knowledge gained from reading this and doing it in your part one is going to be knowledge gained, which you can apply to part two and pass on to your students as time moves forward.
Absolutely. And I think that's important is understanding that knowledge. They change the questions. So you might do all of the apps and be through all of the question bank, but you could have questions on your part one that weren't on the apps. And you might get some wrong. And that's
It's a good
okay.
point, actually. Yeah. I mean, how many times have we seen on Facebook groups that people are saying, I failed my part one because this question wasn't in on any of the apps? And well, you've got to ask yourself, well, where were they doing their revision if it was just on the apps? Where else can you get your knowledge from? So yeah, that's a very good point you're raising.
Absolutely. And we're not looking to get 100%. I mean, we'd like to. Absolutely, we want 100%. But with your knowledge, it will allow you to, if we get one or two wrong, you can still pass the test. But if they change a few of the questions, or you've got five questions that haven't been in your apps that you're using, and then you've got five questions that you can't remember the answer to, then we're starting to struggle because they could potentially be in the same band. And now we're starting to still score 85 to 90 potentially, but we're not scoring them all in a specific band. But with that knowledge, it will allow you with the majority of the questions to eliminate answers and work it out. So you might not have done that specific question. You might not have an in-depth knowledge of that specific topic, but because you've got well-rounded information, you can work it out with everything that you have got. So we've gone back to the part one, which is maybe a good thing for what the podcast is, but the links to the part two is like Craig has mentioned, it's massively important, and it will allow you to pose questions to your trainer. And if you happen to be doing this on your own and you've not got a trainer and you're self-studying, then you know that when you're starting to practice for your part two, that you're practicing the right things. And in the current climate, this is being filmed the middle of 2024. We still have a backlog for the all of the tests, really. But if you've got that in-depth knowledge, you should be able to apply that anywhere. So you don't need to use your local test center. You can travel somewhere to do your part two test. And if you've studied effectively at part one, you're going to have the confidence that I can go anywhere and I can pass a part two. And although I didn't have this knowledge, I was fairly confident after studying for my third part one attempt that I went somewhere that I've never been before for my part two test. And I felt like I had enough knowledge to go on and pass. So it opens a lot more doors being prepared and having that information. Have I gone off too much on a tangent there for the link to part two?
No, I think that, I mean, that's what this episode's about. It's about letting people understand that part one isn't just about passing some questions. Part one is about how it's going to benefit part two. And perhaps we'll talk about part three in a future episode. But right now, it's about the links to part two. And you're right in what you're saying. The knowledge that you gain through effective study is going to definitely help you. And let's not forget, we're not just training people to drive, we're training them to stay alive as well. Anything that we can actually gain ourselves in knowledge and pass on to young 17 and 18-year-olds is going to help. It's going to help. The police will be grateful. The parents will be grateful. You'll be grateful. Everybody's going to be grateful. So, yeah, study.
Absolutely. And maybe we will cover that in a future episode, kind of the pressure that's put on us as driving instructors and maybe life as a driving instructor if you're at the very early stages. But that's how the part one can help prepare you for your ADI part two test. If you're enjoying the content that we're putting out, if you think this might help you, then make sure that you hit the subscribe for any future episodes. If you've got any questions for me or Craig, you can find us on our Facebook page or our Facebook group, and they're both available at the ADI Part 1 podcast. And from there, you will be able to get any information on our upcoming courses to help prepare you for your ADI Part 1, and then ongoing support if you are at the later stages of your training journey as well. So we hope to catch you either in the groups or on a future episode. Thank you for watching.